Good to see everybody tonight for Bible study, and we are doing virtual tonight. We had an Ash Wednesday service, at worship service at the church today at noon, and anytime we do that, we don't have our celebration dinner and Bible study at the church at night. Puts too much stress and strain on our folks to do that. We want everybody to be able to attend that earlier service in the day. So let's say a prayer here. Dear Lord, join us tonight. Lead the Bible study. Help us to focus. Take all of our stresses and strains away. Let us be able to focus in on what you want for us. Prepare our hearts and minds to receive it. And give me the words to speak tonight from the Bible, Lord. Explain it to us in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to do a little bit of good news tonight. And what I mean by that is we're going to look at Peter's life tonight. And this is building on the fishing example that I used Sunday at church. And, you know, Jesus using that example lots of times. And so Peter, of course, is central to that because he and his brother Andrew and then James and John were all fishermen. And so let's look at a couple of passages here. Now, I'm not going to go back because I did preach on basically on Luke 5 when Peter, and the guys have been fishing all night, haven't caught anything, and Jesus asks to use their boat. That's Luke 5:8. And he lets him use it. And then Jesus said, hey, let's go out in deep water and fish. And Peter's like, no, I don't want to do that. I've been up all night. I've been cleaning my nets. We didn't catch anything. So I'm a little disheartened. But because it's you, Jesus, we will do it. And they go out and they catch this enormous amount of fish. And that's kind of the beginning of, at the very, very beginning of when Jesus is calling his disciples. And he says those words, and come and follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. So, but let's look at the second. We're kind of going to look at Peter's failures, his screw-ups, and there's going to be some cool stuff in the midst of that. Let's look at Matthew 14:22. So, first book of the New Testament, and Jesus is going to walk on water. So it's verse 22, 14:22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water. So if we stopped right there, we'd be going, wow, that's awesome. Peter actually is walking on the water just like Jesus did. And he says, but it says, Peter walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But, verse 30, when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me, ! Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? So this is one of those times where it looks like, it's kind of like backhanded compliments, right? Sometimes you get a compliment and then there's a little slam on you at the end of it. And so here, Peter, it looks like a good thing, and then it turns out, oh man, he steps out, he starts walking on water, and then he starts sinking because he starts looking at the wind and the waves and being afraid. And then Jesus, of course, follows that up with, oh, you of little faith. Oh, ouch, right? That's not something you want to hear from Jesus. Let's look at Matthew 15:15. So we're just about a page over. And Jesus is telling this elaborate parable, and he's laying it out for them. And then in 15:15, Peter says, explain the parable to us. And then Jesus' response to that is, are you still so dull? Jesus asked them. He needs it explained, and then Jesus does explain it to them. But no one wants to hear those words from Jesus. Are you still so dull that you don't get this? That you're not smart enough to pick this up quick enough? That's not something that we want to hear from Jesus, and yet it is something that Peter does. If we look at a couple of more here, let's. There's actually about 13 of these. We'll only do about 8 of these different things here, but. Let's look at let's look at John 13:8. So we're going to go Matthew, Mark, Luke, John 13:8. And this is one of my favorite stories because it's Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And it says, let's just start in verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you'll understand." "No," said Peter, "you will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." So, again, Peter kind of missing the point, and Jesus is trying to do this for all 12 of them. And Peter goes, no, you're not washing my feet. And then Jesus is having to kind of chastise him a little bit and go, if I don't do this, then you have no part with me. And he's like, oh yeah, wash all of me. And, I misunderstood, that kind of thing. If we look at another couple of ones that are out here, look with me at Matthew 16. So you're going to go back to where we were just a second ago. So Matthew 16. And this is the passage, kind of the heart of what I'm talking about tonight, but it's not very fun to be this person. And this is how quickly things can change. And it's 16, and then we'll pick up in verse 13. So Matthew 16:13. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "What do you say? Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Man alive, that sounds awesome. That is absolutely wonderful. Man, I would love to hear that from Jesus. Some of those words were just powerful compliments and just, hey, this is what, something good that's going to happen to you. And, you are blessed. And, Peter has said the right thing. But if we just go down in the same chapter, this is the sad part. You knew it was coming. Remember I said the backhanded compliment, right? So if we just go down a little bit further, it says in verse 21, this is the same chapter, right? We just skipped down just a little bit. We're continuing right where we left off. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord." And it's exclamation mark. "Never, Lord," he said. "This shall never happen to you!" Exclamation mark. Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan!" Exclamation mark. "You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Dang. Ouch. That is just awful. That is not it's at first, hey, you're going to get the keys to the kingdom. You're the rock on which I'm going to build the church. Get behind me, Satan. And he's using the exclamation marks that Peter used. So, he says, you don't have in mind the things of God. You have in mind the things of men. And that's where lots of us sit today, is that we have in mind what's important to us, the things that we want to accomplish. all of the goals that we have in life, whether it is graduate high school, graduate college, get married, have kids, buy a home, buy a car, work towards, whatever, getting promotions or owning your own company, you're working towards your retirement at an early age and all, we have in mind, everybody kind of has this path that the world is putting out there in front of them, whether you buy into it or not. But that is the things of men as opposed to the things of God. So let's look at a couple of more here, just to make sure, that we're understanding all of this. If we go to John, let's look at Matthew 26 while we're here. So Matthew 26, we're going to get towards the end, right before Jesus is arrested. And this is definitely a Chris Caldwell moment here. This is one of those things where it's Matthew 26:36 is where we're going to start. It says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.' Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Couldn't you keep watch with me for 1 hour?' he asked Peter. 'Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.'" Remember, today is all about temptation, right? Jesus, 40 days being tempted in the desert by the devil. That's what Ash Wednesday is about. It says, "He went away a second time and prayed, 'My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done.' When he came back again, he found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, 'Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.'" And so this is, I tend to work really hard, and these guys were commercial fishermen. And so at the end of the day, Jill will be talking to me, and I'm like zoned out. I'm just like, I sit in front of the television maybe for an hour at night just to kind of veg a little bit, rest, pet the dog, that kind of stuff. And there's just no coherence to anything that I say or hear at that moment. And here is Jesus at the end of the day going, watch with me and pray. This is important. 3 times he asked him. And this is, it's not the only time that Jesus is asking him, and there's 3 things that go along with it, right? Because here in a minute, we know, and just if we flip over, let's continue the story. I don't want to get off track here. Look with me now at John 18:10. So we go back. That's where we are. John 18:10. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And this is John's version of those, what we just read right after that, when they come and Judas walks up and betrays Jesus, and they're trying to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. So 18:10 and 11 says, so let's look at 18:8. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I've not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away!" ! "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" So here you have Peter, and he's, jumping the gun, going out doing, he's misunderstood again what's going to happen to Jesus. And now he's trying to fight with a sword, and he goes after Malchus, this guy. And then, you would like to think, "I'm defending you, Jesus," that Jesus would say something nice to you. But Jesus said, "Put the sword away. What are you doing?" Don't you understand, kind of deal. And then, of course, the one you expect me to share is that Peter denies Christ 3 times while he's being arrested and questioned and all that, getting ready to be crucified. And so 3 times, and calling down curses on himself as he denies Christ. And so for each of us, we sit here and we go, and in this story, And we kind of figure, okay, so that's it for Peter. You know, there's at least, I shared 8 things with you. There's 13 different times that he misunderstands. Call them mishaps, call them failures, call them whatever you want to, where he seriously fails Jesus, and even to the point of calling down curses. And so here, you know, it's not the end. It's not all that there is. And so there is this great triumphant story in John 21 after Jesus is resurrected, and we're going to go there in just a second. But let me share a couple stories with you, just so you know. Okay, so Jill has a really good friend, and when she was growing up, they went to church together, and the pastor, just like we did Sunday, we were offering communion Sunday, the Lord's Supper. We did it again today at the Ash Wednesday service. And but on Sunday, you know, we ask people to prepare their hearts before they take communion because of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians about not taking communion unworthily, coming to the Lord's table unworthily. And so most of the time we say, you know, you need to pray repentance. You need to ask forgiveness for your sins, kind of deal. But Jill's home pastor said, you know, this is what we're going to do. I want you, because it says in the Sermon on the Mount, if you have an offering that you're bringing to the church, and you got something against somebody, right? You got a problem with somebody. You should go leave your offering on the kind of on the side of the road there and go make reconciliation with this person before you come and offer, you know, bring this offering to the church. You need to go take care of it now. That's what it says. And so Jill's home pastor said, okay, in our congregation, if you got a problem with somebody, anybody, I want you to go take care of it now before we take communion. I want your heart to be clear before we come and take the bread and juice today. And so everybody starts getting up and milling around. It's an unusual thing, but he asked him, you know, go say I'm sorry, or go tell somebody, you know, you go work it out between you. Matthew 18:18, you know, one-on-one kind of deal. And yet the problem is that a lot of the folks, you know, went to one lady. They were all lined up to talk to one woman in the church who was the problem. And that wasn't something he was expecting. And man, it made a spectacle of the problems that she had caused in that church. And so, you know, that was an opportunity, and they sorted it out because she actually became a very a benefit to that church, to you know, that situation later on. But they had to get to the point of forgiveness, and that's where we are here with Peter. He is a royal screw up. He's got a lot of sin in his life. He's misunderstanding. He's stepping out when he's not supposed to be stepping out, and he has not really learned what it is to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And so if we go back to Matthew 16, and I'll share, while you're turning there, I'll share one last thing with you, is that, you know, when we're talking about forgiveness, you got to, when I was at Tusculum Church, when in probably my second year of being there, I met Jill, and we were, I don't know that we were, you'll have to correct me, Jill, I'm not sure if we were dating at that point or not, but anyway, we had a youth lock-in at the church, and she was there, and with a friend, her friend Roxanne, and Jill brought brownies to this lock-in. Jill says we weren't dating at that point. So she brings these brownies, and she said, I made these for you. And I was like, oh, well, thank you, you know, showing off her cooking skills. And so she brings them, and so I actually ate one. And then she goes, they're not for everybody else. These are just for you. And then, you know, so I took them, put them in my car kind of deal. But I only ate one that night. Next day, you know, we're up all night. Next day I go home and I take those brownies to my house. And I have 3 roommates at Vanderbilt. And I put them in our kitchen. And they get all gobbled down by them and their girlfriends and stuff. And they're gone. And I end up taking the plate back to Jill. And it's, you know, nothing's ever said about that. And then we start dating, and then we get engaged, and then we get married, and then a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, Jill and Roxanne are telling this story, and they're just dying laughing. And I'm like, what are you dying laughing about this story about these brownies? Because I said, I ate one. It was fine. There wasn't a problem. And Jill said, I made them, and I put X-Lax in them, which was a laxative, and I put them in because I was mad at you, and you ate one, and then you took them home, and you gave them to your roommates who gobbled them down. And I said, Yeah, I didn't eat but just one. And I said, it didn't seem to affect me at all. But here's the thing. If I had known that Jill had tried to poison me in that way, we would not be married today. I'm just going to be honest with you. If somebody had told me she put X-Lax in those brownies and sent them home with you, then I'd have been like, adios, amiga. You know, I would not have, and there would be no forgiveness in my heart at that point for that. And yet, so we've been married 32 years at this point. And so for us, the idea of forgiveness is something that has to enter into our Christian walk, because that's what Jesus did with Peter, who didn't just deny him once, denied him 3 times, and then messed up these 13 times in a big way. And yet Jesus gives him the keys to the kingdom, puts him in charge as chairman of the board of these disciples. And he does great and amazing things for God in the book of Acts. And that's where we are. That's the good news for this evening. Okay, so let's look at 2 passages here real quick. I don't want us to stay too long, but back in Matthew 16, look at 24 here. And this is where we've got to get to in our walk. This would help us in our work. This would help us in our marriage. This would help us as being a parent. This would help us in just being active and fruitful for Jesus out in the world. It says, so 16:24, then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good would it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. So that's going back to that idea of, what does the world, think is what we should be about versus, he said to Peter, you're more concerned with worldly concerns than with God concerns. And he lays it out for him there. We're supposed to deny ourselves, take up our cross and follow him. All right, so John 21, that's I promised you was the good news of the evening. And I want you to see this with me. Peter comes back, and there are some questions that Jesus asked him in John 21. And this is the miraculous catch of fish. And remember, Jesus is on the beach. He's got, this fire going, and the disciples are down. They're upset. Peter says, I'm going fishing, because it's what he knows. It's what he enjoys. It's how he processes and deals with grief. And so he's out on this boat with the disciples, and Jesus yells from the shore, cast your net on the other side. And they cast it, and then they catch these 153 fish. And Peter does the Forrest Gump thing and jumps off the boat, swims to shore, because he's so filled with grief and remorse about actually denying Christ 3 times. And when he gets to shore, they put some of those fish on the fire. They're cooking him for breakfast. And then Jesus has this conversation with Peter. And it says, verse 15, 21:15, when they finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And when he asked him that first question, what's the these? What's he talking about? Do you love me more than these? And I wrote down, do you love me more than these other disciples love me? Do you love me more than these guys love me? The second one was, do you love me more than all this fishing gear? Because that's his passion. That's what he does. You're more concerned about worldly things than about godly things. Do you love me more than all the boat and all the fishing gear and all that stuff that you make a living with? Do you love me more than these 153 really expensive fish that are going to make you a lot of money today? Because that's what it was. It said the nets were full to the breaking point, but didn't break. Do you love me more than money? Do you love me more than you love all these other fishermen, right? Your friends that you fish with. Because my grandfather was he loved to fish, and he loved the guys that he fished with. They were his best friends, and those are some of when he would look back on that, his smile would come across his face, and he would just, regale you with these tales of the fish tales, right? Of all the days out there on the river or on the lake. And so, Peter, do you love me more than these? All of these different things that are here. And Peter's response is, yes, Lord. And then he says, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, and he goes on to tell him what's going to happen to him and what's going to happen. Jesus is going to ascend into heaven, and they're going to be there as leaders for him in the world, and with great responsibility and opportunities to follow him and be fruitful for him. And he's saying, do you love me? And he's hearkening back to John 14 and 15, where it's like, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. You will follow me. You will deny yourself and go out into the world. And that is, for us, I hearken back to George Whitefield that I talked about today, and it may be Whitfield. I don't know. He's from England. But God opens a door for him to be able to go. He had no public education. There was no public school. He didn't even go to school for the first time until he was 12 years old. And that was only for a couple of years. And then he went back home, was a hellion for a few years. Then he goes back. He does another year and a half of schooling. And then somehow he has the opportunity to go to Oxford in England. Somebody opens that door. And when we talk about those things and we sit there and look, how on earth was he able to do, what all had to happen for him to get into Oxford? These are the four things that happened. He was 18. He goes to Oxford. He borrowed $50 from a friend. That was what was required up front for a deposit. He got scholarships based upon forms that he filled out and tests that he took. And then he started waiting tables at restaurants, blackening boots. So he was doing shoe shining kind of thing. And he served as an RA in the dorm. There you go. That's Sela, right? At Belmont. Did you hear all of that? The door didn't just swing open and he just walked into Oxford. There were things that he had to do that God gave him. God opened each one of those doors, and he had to walk in. And in the midst of that, it wasn't just, here's the cash, go. It was that he had to go and earn it. He had to work and serve in that way. And that is that, deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. And that God led him to Oxford out of, his mom and dad owned a bar and an inn, and his dad died when he was 2. And so it is one of those situations where, he was behind the 8 ball. He was a sinner, had lots of sin in his life, lots of problems. And so God got him into Oxford. And then there he met John and Charles Wesley, and God used them to mentor him. And he became this great evangelist where just 100,000 people came to know the Lord through the ministry of those men. And it was just amazing to watch happen. But for us, sometimes we feel like Peter messing up over and over and over, and we don't get to the point where we think that we can be used. And then other people look at us and judge us, and they say, there's no way, because you've screwed up so many times, that you can be used by God. And yet God still is willing to use us. And so the good news tonight is, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how much sin's in your life. We're just one action away from being used by God. And that is falling to our knees and asking for forgiveness. And that's what Peter did there on the beach, is when he came ashore from swimming in, fell on his knees before God. And he goes right before Jesus and said, man, I am sorry. I am sorry. I am such a sinner. And he said that in the beginning as well, in Luke 5, when Jesus said, put out in deep water and let's go fishing. And he's like, I don't want to. And then when they caught all the fish, he was like, forgive me, Lord, I'm a sinner. And so tonight, I hope you'll carry that good news and know that God can use you and will use you to do great and mighty things in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. God bless you.
Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.